Hello, and good morning. My name is Jonathan Parfrey. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Resolve, and greetings from downtown Los Angeles. Really delighted to greet you wherever you are. And as a point of privilege, I want to thank a few folks for teaming up with Climate Resolve, making this remote event so important and special. Especially want to give thanks to Professor Ram Ramanathan at Scripps. Thank you, Ram. Your kindness, your sort of gentle guidance is always so appreciated. And I feel like I've met an old friend, but even though it's a recent friend, thank you. And the same for Sam Estefa, who has brought great leadership to the governor's office of land use and climate innovation. And Abby Edwards, also such a great partner in so many aspects. Deep thanks also to Tina Christie at UCLA, Marcello Orozco at UMass Boston, and Fauna Foreman from UCSD. What a wonderful collaborator in so many of these sessions. And added thanks for Louise Bedsworth up in Cal School of Law and Sigrid Wright in Santa Barbara for their hard work in pulling things together. And to Climate Resolve staffers, you know who you are, and so many of the speakers, and you're just wonderful colleagues, and it's always great to work with you. Thank you so much. And so that point of privilege is now over, and I want to tell you what you're going to stick with us for the next 55 minutes, and I think here's what you're going to get out of this by the end of those 55 minutes. And I think it's good to know that going in. You're going to hear some great, tangible ideas on what resilience measures you can take in your own communities. And there will be ideas, and I'm hoping some inspiration as well. And first, to lead us off, I want to introduce Apoorv Pande, who is an architect who has a profound personal story to share. And let's start there. Apoorv, lead us off.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel and to be in such good company. And thank you for inviting me on it. As Jonathan described, I'm an architect and a principal of my own firm. I've actually been working in the profession for over 25 years. I've known fire hazards as an architect practicing in California for over 2 decades. In particular, I have experience working on projects located in what's called the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface. I've worked with multiple agencies in such zones, particularly for code-related issues. I've advised fellow architectural peers, consulted with public and private agencies and entities, and given technical talks on hillside developments, fire-resistant design. I've assessed fire ratings of construction assemblies, reviewed with the fire department hydrant locations, hose lengths, truck turnabouts, road widths, alleyway access, even pressure flows, and how they affect the designs we create. I reviewed fire ratings of material assemblies and whether they conform to local and state codes. Yet, this was an event that affected me personally. I was overseas when the wildfire happened. We packed up and left right after Christmas for a family reunion, and the news came to us live at 2 a.m. in our hotel room overseas. Phone alerts from the fire department ordered evacuation late at night and in another time zone, 12 hours away. We quite literally, this is no exaggeration, we watched our home and our street burn live on the media. The cover page of the New York Times had a live feed of the wildfire, and it just so happened that they were streaming the progress of the fire from our street. So I literally watched our place burn on the cover page of the New York Times, and that was actually our source of information, was the media. So I realized I experienced one of the tragedies I professionally advise on protecting against, and the sense of powerlessness you get from far away. So this event affects me both as practitioner and as a private citizen. And I've got 3 slides that show the extent of how this devastation can affect an entire town, much like Altadena or the Palisades. So I managed to fish out from my phone the few pictures I still had. 3 pictures of the street by our house just before we left for the new year. The alleyway right behind used to straddle 2 views. So on the left is the hillside ridge with the local church, the preschool, and the kindergarten. This is before after. I just managed to visit, and right behind the camera, that would be me in a hazmat suit, but I didn't want to take a selfie and show that. And it was so disorienting. The reason why I picked this pair is because I used to, as an architect, often take these pictures to see the topographical diversity of that region, because this is along a saddle. You get this flat land to your left, and on the next slide, you'll see all these hidden streets that used to just go down the hillside, and you could see this vast amount of hillside vista to the other side. And with the streetscape and the landscape around it and the flora gone, it looks much like a war zone. And those narrow alleyways, much like you'd get like in San Francisco or even in Roman towns where you get these little slivers of light going through, all of that is gone. And now there's just this vast burnt devastation. So the third picture is actually a hike I'd taken just before I left up that trail. And I just turned around and took a picture just as a personal diary to say, oh, you know what? This picture actually represents a lot of the issues I often talk about. We're nestled at the bottom of this giant, beautiful, verdant forest. And then I realized after this wildfire that roughly up from behind me was where it began. And this beautiful forest that we loved is actually behaved like a giant fuel tank. And it just found its way to consume the entire town that it surrounded. So I hope we can use this event to galvanize us all to action on resilience and addressing the ever-increasing risk of natural disasters in dense urban areas. So I thought I'd present the story not just as a professional, but also as a private citizen who was affected.
Thank you so much, Apurv. And we're going to be coming back and talking more in a little while. It's my great honor to introduce the next guest. It's the Honorable Lindsay Horvath, who is the supervisor for the 3rd District in the County of Los Angeles. And it's wonderful to have her here. And I would just like to invite you, Lindsay, to share some remarks.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm certainly looking forward to celebrating 15 years of climate resolve in April. I know your strong leadership, Jonathan, not only for our environment, but for our entire region, has been nothing short of extraordinary. So thank you. And thank you for the partnership that you are offering in the work we have ahead as a result of what we've seen here in 2025. I want to thank the governor's office, the University of California, and the Pontifical Academy for sponsoring this event. Thank you, Apurv, for sharing that personal story as well. It's incredibly moving to know that you were watching in real time live your neighborhood change before your eyes. And I can only imagine what that felt like. And I am so sorry for everything that you and your family and your neighbors have experienced. As the supervisor who represents the district, that includes the entire footprint of the Palisades fire, as well as many of the other fires that were on our televisions at the beginning of this year, from the Hearst fire in Sylmar to the Archer fire, the Woodley fire, the Sunset fire that happened in the hills, all the way to the most recent Sepulveda fire. For a period of time, I just wasn't sleeping, waiting to see where the next one was going to happen. And it's no secret that LA County is the most vulnerable county of any county in throughout the United States, more vulnerable to natural hazards than any other county. And that's one of the many reasons why climate change is so important to me and why I feel privileged to serve in this role. It also is, just part of my DNA. Being raised as a social justice Catholic, it's part of my commitment. I have to say, I had the honor and privilege of meeting with our Holy Father, and we had a private conversation I was sharing earlier about his encyclical Laudato Si. And after our conversation, I got a tattoo here on my wrist in his handwriting, marking the verse 231, which really informs my service in government, but just, as a human being and being a steward of our creation. And so I am praying for our Holy Father, of course, and for all of the families who have been impacted by these devastating events this year. And I'm absolutely committed to helping each and every one of them rebuild, recover, and just know that they're not alone while they're going through this process. It's important to me that we're also focusing on safety while we do this. And safety means recognizing the impacts of the climate crisis. We have to acknowledge the 21st century realities that we're facing. Monumental catastrophe is an opportunity for a smart rebuild based on these 21st century realities that climate change has brought us. And our communities are eager to rebuild, but with natural disasters in mind, they really want to rebuild in a smart and intentional way. And I think of my community of Sunset Mesa, which is working together. They lost just shy of 400 homes in their neighborhood up on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And they know that by working together and at scale to leverage resources and good ideas and intentional design, they'll be able to recreate their community for a much more resilient future. And this has inspired me to recently convene a Blue Ribbon Commission on climate action and fire safety. There are about 20 commissioners, including Jonathan. Thank you for saying yes. And each of them bring experience on construction, engineering, planning, insurance, fire, housing, utilities, and more. We are partnering with UCLA, Go Bruins, and other local research institutions to bring the best possible expertise to prevent this from happening again to the extent that it is in our power, and to make sure that evidence-based recommendations are being brought forth. And so this is an independent commission. While I have helped to convene it, they are off and running and making sure that they are bringing forward the best ideas that we need to be considering to develop a comprehensive roadmap to ensure our county's recovery is designed to withstand the realities of changing climate, where wildfires, extreme heat, drought, flooding, and so many challenges face us and are becoming ever more frequent and severe. This effort is partially funded by the California Community Foundation. And that independence that I talked about really means that we're focusing on the most fact-based ideas, the best ideas that can be vetted and presented uninhibited by political special interests, governmental influence, which we know has often compromised in the past the goals that we set for what we want to see in our communities. So this commission is creating near-term actionable recommendations. It will support homeowners in their rebuilding plans, but it will also advise us as leaders and stewards of public resources, and where we need to be investing our dollars and how we need to be thinking about our built environment for the years to come. Can have recommendations on applying those lessons more broadly to climate vulnerable neighborhoods and infrastructure. And while we're leading this out of my office, this effort really extends to all of Los Angeles County. We want these best practices to be considered by the region, so we can think about best materials, methods, and plans, not only in terms of recovery, but also what we want our 21st century reality to look like throughout our communities. The Commission and UCLA will work to leverage impacted and vulnerable communities as well through this process. We have representatives who have been impacted both in the Palisades and Eaton fire burn footprint, and their personal experience, in addition to their expertise, will help inform us. But I have to say, this issue of climate action and adaptation has really been at the heart of my work in service before I was a supervisor, and has been part of my focus from day one. During my year serving as chair of the board, we adopted the 2045 Climate Action Plan. We introduced on my very first day as chair and approved the county's water plan, which has been something I've been proud to champion, convening more than 200 water agencies throughout our region to work together on what a water resilient future needs to look like. But also the extreme heat action plan and tenant protections that we're working on are underway. Our climate resiliency initiative and thinking about living coastlines. We started the framework of a climate budget. And while you're chair, you go back to New York and meet with all the experts on how we have the best bond ratings, among other things, as a county. And they actually asked us what we were doing in terms of our budget to think about climate impact. And so I was proud to see that not only is it important from a policy perspective for all of the reasons we know to protect our environment, but even for those who are thinking about financial risk, that it's top of mind for them too. And it should be for all of our communities as we're thinking about fiscal resiliency. We also passed a community forestry master plan, an EV master plan, a disaster preparedness convening that happened throughout our district. We hosted many town halls. And our dear Clean Power Alliance, the largest now CCA in the country here in Los Angeles County and also serving Ventura County, has been rated the #1 renewable energy provider in America. So I know that we're going to continue to build on the data-driven strategies that have really been driving the work at Los Angeles County. The Our County Sustainability Plan was passed and adopted before my time, but it was my singular focus to make sure that we're funding this work, because plans are great, but action is better. And the equity-driven vision in this plan is incredibly important for our most vulnerable and impacted communities. The 2045 Climate Action Plan that I mentioned is truly a roadmap to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. The climate vulnerability assessment I mentioned includes data and maps on all of our climate risks throughout the region. And our public works department is working on climate resilient communities, making infrastructure investments guided by climate risk. So this is just some of the work that we're doing in Los Angeles County, helping to lead by example, and also offer the work that we're doing in service to each of our 88 cities and the unincorporated area, to make sure that the work that we're doing benefits the region. And so it's truly my privilege and pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for including me in today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Horvath. I just have a couple of quick follow-up questions. What's the largest county by population in the United States? I don't know the answer to that question.
Los Angeles by far is the largest county. We have more than 10 million residents. We have a budget that is now about $50 billion, and we have pretty significant impact as a result.
So what happens in LA County might be influential somewhere else. I'm just throwing that out there as a crazy idea.
Absolutely. I tease some members of Congress and some senators that I represent more people than they do, respectively. And not that it's a competition, but it just goes to show the impact that we're making in Los Angeles County touches many lives and can be as significant as some of our federal policies if we work together in partnership. So
yes, I had the pleasure of meeting earlier this week with Miguel Santana of California Community Foundation, and he was reporting back what he's hearing from communities who went through the recent wildfires. And he said community members want to recover quickly with speed. So that was the first one. They want to save money in that process of rebuilding. Mm-hmm. But most of all, they want their homes to retain their value or even gain in value when they rebuild. And for that to take place, those homes have to be insurable. Mm-hmm. And so here's the nugget that I've sort of arrived at in thinking about this issue. Like, if we build these homes back to the way they were before the building codes were put in place, before our understanding of what building in the WUI looks like, will they be insurable? And we have to make them insurable, because if they're not insurable, they can't be sold. And so, is there a grand bargain to be had where we are able to work on the building codes, on what the plans might be, in perhaps even doing early bulk purchases of key materials to drive down costs, and giving architects like Horvath the license to do something beautiful. But at the same time, we need to create homes that actually can be insured. But we need assurance from the insurance companies that if we do those things, there's going to be that ability at the end of the day that these homes will indeed be insured. Where are we in that process right now? Or is it much too nascent to even conjecture where we are on that?
It is a question I get asked every day. It is asked at each of my Wednesday evening town halls every week. It is a focus. And I think we really barrage the insurance commissioner's representative, whoever they are, in those town halls. With a lot of really tough questions, because that is really at the core, for so many people, am I in their decision of whether they're going to rebuild, will they be able to get insurance going forward? And as you know, that's why we have, that expertise represented in our Blue Ribbon Commission, because it's not only important to think about, the building materials and how we streamline permitting so we're able to move quickly, but also to make sure that we are making an investment that makes sense for our future. I have a former elected official in Malibu who shared at one of the town halls. He's like, I lived through Woolsey. They lived through the Broad Fire. We experienced the Franklin Fire just before the holidays. It's like, I don't want to be rebuilding my house every few years, to try and stay in Malibu. And I think that line of thinking also sticks with me too, that, we shouldn't just be making the goal, let's rebuild what was there because it's going to be what gets you back into a home as quick as possible. But why don't we make sure we get people into the right home? And often the two biggest barriers are, well, three biggest are really access to those materials, access to finances, financing to be able to pay for those kinds of improvements, and then the insurance component. If I rebuild, will I be insured? And so I've personally been meeting with insurance companies, even though, county doesn't really have sort of a lever to bring them into a different kind of relationship with us. We are using our platform at the county to with our partners in the state, and of course the insurance commissioner, to stress how important it is that that they be part of this conversation and rebuild, because it's such a critical component of how people are thinking. And of course, we want people to come back to their communities. We want them to be back in the neighborhood that they've been building these beautiful memories for so many generations. So that's a critical component.
Thank you so much, Supervisor. And it makes a very natural segue to our next speaker, who is Alexis Pelosi, who is the former advisor on climate for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And Alexis, the question of real estate in the face of disaster, this is your area of specialty. Could you share some thoughts with us?
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you for the invitation to come today and to speak about this important topic. And I want to echo, the thank yous and the prayers that my fellow panelists have already shared. And I just have to say, I mean, the interaction and the conversation you just had with Supervisor Horvath is exactly the reason why I was so interested in participating today. And I'm really looking forward to a robust discussion. As Jonathan mentioned, I am the former senior advisor in the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Prior to joining HUD, I spent over 20 years as a land use attorney in California. And so those two experiences have really given me an ability to look both locally and understand what it takes to build in a community, and then nationally in my role as a senior advisor for climate, looking across the United States around climate and resilience issues in the built environment in particular. And so bringing those two expertise together, thinking about this work, and in particular the devastation that has happened in Los Angeles, I reflected back on, one of my best friends lost everything in the 2017 Tubbs fire. And I remember when that happened and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, knowing, there had been wildfires, but just the devastation. Then a year later, in Paradise, California, with the 2018 Camp Fire and an entire town being wiped off the map. And I think it really was a wake-up call to that intersection between land use and climate resilience, and the need to be able to be thinking holistically around this. And then at HUD on the national level, looking at across the United States, the insurance market, as Supervisor Horvath and you, Jonathan, were just talking about, and the pulling out of insurers across the country, and ways and examples that we can take a look at to help as we are rebuilding in fire-prone areas, to bring those insurers back to the table and to be able to have a conversation about, so what types of measures can we put into place at the local and at the land use level, the community level, to be able to ensure that as we are rebuilding in a resilient way, so that folks are not, not only having the risk of losing their insurance, but also knowing that when they go back into their home, that their home is resilient. It is also cost effective to operate, and they can continue to invest in their community and have that long-term certainty. And so yesterday, there was a lot of conversation that came up about the uncertainty and the challenging funding and investment environment that we are in today with the changes that are happening at the federal level. But I was very inspired by the presentations and discussions. And I also just want to relay that this work, we know, always needs to happen at the local level. So these issues that we are talking about around resilience and the work that needs to be done needs to happen locally. It needs to happen in community. It needs to be driven by community. And so while there may be uncertainty at a federal level, with all of the expertise and the great conversations and the collaboration that should happen locally and also across local and regional jurisdictional boundaries, we have an opportunity to really build back more resilient after a fire, but then also, to think before the fire happens, what types of investments should we be making? And then how do we fund those, especially in a wildfire context, where the retrofits and the investments that are needed in homes and the ongoing maintenance and the ongoing, code enforcement and looking at the properties to ensure that we're building resilience are critical and important. So I do think that pre-disaster visioning and how to look at the rebuilding process, how to look at the land use controls around that is really critical to building the overall resilience and to help to accelerate when a disaster does happen, the ability for a community to rebuild. And there is a lot of conversation and a lot of planning that goes into that. But I think that this discussion in particular, and what is great to talk about, is how do we take those plans into implementation and into action, so that when the devastation happens, we are able to better recover in a faster way, because all of those tools are in place and it isn't just a plan that's on the shelf. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That's exactly right. We're going to get to the conversation, but I first want to introduce Sam Carter, who is a founding principal of Resilient Cities Catalyst. Sam and I have been able to collaborate on a number of issues over the years. And Sam, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your background and some key insights related to what we're facing in resilience in California.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And I'm sitting here very moved and inspired by all the speakers that came before. But as Jonathan mentioned, I'm the founder of an organization called Resilient Cities Catalyst. I also teach at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. And in prior roles, I worked at the Rockefeller Foundation and the Social Science Research Council. And over the last 20 years, I've been involved in many disaster recovery processes. Here in the United States, this includes Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and its Unified New Orleans planning process. That was back in 2005, 2006. Superstorm Sandy in New York and the Rebuild by Design process in 2012. The National Disaster Resilience Competition in 2015, 2016. That was with Secretaries Donovan and Castro, Alexis, at HUD. Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico in 2017, and then the Woolsey Fire in LA and Ventura in 2018, and then COVID-19 and the subsequent economic fallout. And in many ways, this disaster we've been talking about in the LA context is unprecedented. And again, I think it's one of the, if not the first modern urban wildfire in this new era of extreme climate disasters. And I say that for a few reasons. One is that it's truly captured the world's attention in a way that none others have. I mean, like many of you, and were personally experienced by things like the Camp Fire in Paradise and events like that. But this fire in LA has literally made the front page of newspapers around the world and been covered by media more than I think any major climate event since Sandy. And I just want to acknowledge that. It's an important part of this disaster. Also, the scale of economic loss. I mean, a lot of that is driven by the populations impacted and the structures and the communities. But beyond that, the total loss of whole neighborhoods is interesting, and it's a unique dynamic of urban wildfire. And there's a kind of randomness to it that's really remarkable in the sense that the neighborhoods most impacted were largely due to the way that the wind was blowing and where the embers landed. And so communities that might not have had a perception that they might be at risk suddenly were faced with catastrophic loss. But as unique as this event was, I've observed many things that kind of create a through line between this event and other events that I've been a part of and been part of helping them recover. Most notably, the kind of incredible and human experience of everyone wanting to help in whatever way they can. I think that's kind of one of the most remarkable human things about these, the kind of, again, just kind of mass organic mobilization of talent and resource to kind of dive right in and help. And we see that every single place where an event like this happens across all cultures. There's also this experience, which has been referenced earlier by other speakers, of people wanting to return to this state of what was there before. Social scientists refer to this as the valence of a place. If you think about electrons and where they want to live around a nucleus of an atom, social scientists use this as a metaphor to talk about, okay, there's this state that communities want, that they're familiar with, that they've inhabited, and they want to snap back into that state. And that's the most normal and common experience across all disasters as well. And that desire is expressing itself, I think, a lot through the politics and the policy of the moment. Political leaders are committing to their constituents very appropriately to do everything possible to accelerate the recovery process and to ensure we move swiftly to get people's homes and parks and schools back, because that's the essence of community, is these spaces where people come together. But I think the question that's in front of all of us in a moment like this is, how do we act quickly and come together to build resilience as we're rebuilding? And I'm really encouraged by Supervisor Horvath's Blue Ribbon Commission that she just spoke to, and Jonathan's service on that. That's going to harvest knowledge and talent, and it's going to benefit not just the county's communities that they're representing, but I think the region as a whole and the state and even internationally. I also want to call out, based on past work, the power of public philanthropic partnerships. And I know you referenced, Supervisor Horvath, the kind of California Community Foundation and its role. It has the power to create a new space for conversation, and it has the power to kind of push our thinking on policy and the built environment, things like how we use financial tools to manage risk, but also how we think about community scale interventions. how do parks and open space serve as defensible space and fire breaks, and actually shift that risk profile and insurability at the community scale. And that's a really key part of this conversation. Kind of my last comment is a reflection on what we heard on the last panel from Julia Kim, Kristen Pauling, Natalie Hernandez, others. These types of processes, every single one that I've been a part of, and pretty much every other one that I've read about and studied, they only work when communities set the priorities and are centered at every stage of the process. So my recommendation to everyone on the panel and everyone involved in this process is to identify where the community's gathering now. That might be on a WhatsApp thread, it might be in a church pew, it might be in a school auditorium, but find those places of energy and activity that are emergent organically in the kind of time after the event, and meet them where they are now. Start building those relationships and trust and listening deeply to those communities, because that's the foundation of every resilient recovery process I've ever been a part of. So thanks again for the opportunity, Jonathan, and happy to have this conversation.
Thanks so much, Sam. Apurv, I want to ping back to you. Thank you for sharing the slides, the visuals, profound. The home where I raised my children was in Marquez Knolls, not far from there, and that home is also now ashes. We moved out like 15 years ago, but it's great that it's an impact to see what has happened to was part of your history. Anyway, I just wanted to get back to you as an architect. How has this experience framed your approach to your practice going forward? I'm sure you are aware, and you've made reference to a number of the hardening, techniques that you have already employed. But now, how has this personal experience affected your practice?
Well, thanks for setting that question up, particularly because it's a really trenchant kind of observation. One of the things I personally feel is, since it's affected me both as an architect and as a resident, the architectural response is fairly straightforward. We need to have a certain amount, there needs to be a code emphasis, there needs to be a certain rebuilding emphasis, there need to be best practices. There's a wealth of knowledge that the community has, architects, engineers, planners, and agencies. And coming at that solution, at a set of solutions technically, is not problematic, because we have a fair amount of knowledge and history in rebuilding and in having a means of addressing such events. However, as a resident, when I experienced this, I did notice something quite interesting. There is an architectural response. It's fairly easy. I am bombarded with calls by owners, residents, neighbors, friends, and I've given solely free advice to anyone who calls. And then there is the idea, as Sam was describing and the supervisor was describing, of the community itself. So I feel there are two scales at which one needs to address this issue. There is the scale of the individual, which is, I have a home, I have a property, and it's right next to a forest, and I don't want it to burn down again. A fairly straightforward situation. And then there's the issue of the community itself. How dense should it be? How should one really interface with the wildland? How far should certain things be? How many people should be situated there? How should access work? How should rebuilding work? What should it look like? And I feel like it's a dual scale approach that one needs to look at. And just in terms of the physical extent of that wildfire, just as Sam was describing before, it just mattered. I mean, it just depends on which way the wind blew, right? So sometimes the wind changing its direction can actually affect, or Alexis was describing as well, can affect a whole different community. So the interesting thing is, if we look at the problem as individuals, we'll come up with individual solutions. But if you look at the problem as a community, we'll come up with a group solution that I feel is a more adult and grown-up response than perhaps just thinking primarily of our own individual responses.
Thank you so much. Supervisor Horvath, you heard from Apoorv that there might be a community response. And the way our local newspaper, the LA Times, has been framing the community response is we want to return, and as Sam has noted, as quickly as possible. We don't want any impediments from government. We don't want you guys telling us what to do. Just leave us alone, and we're going to do it as quickly as possible. Is that I understand the grief that people are going through. I understand the crisis that they've experienced and their need to want to get back their largest investment, which is their home, which is their nest egg, which is their retirement, the way that they believe they'll transfer wealth from their generation to that of their children, that they're deeply invested in that home. And yet, how do we introduce ideas of sustainability or of hardening or of a community approach or even density to people who are in that sort of moment of crisis? And I was wondering if you could share your ideas.
Well, I think the recovery process has also has very much illuminated for people the importance of a collective approach. The phase 2 process of debris removal by the Army Corps of Engineers that we're leading on, we would communicate. It's not just, yes, everyone has to turn in their form to authorize them to come and clear their lot. But if everyone chooses a different way to clear their lot, we're going to have a whole lot of trouble, as opposed to if you all work together. And so there was sort of inherent in this recovery process already a recognition that if you want to go quicker and have some efficiencies, taking a moment to work together and not just entirely on your own actually will enable both. It will enable better, smarter response, more efficient response. And it keeps your community moving, because you don't want to just what we have heard from people who have said they don't want any government regulation in the way. They've also said they don't want to just come back to their house. They want a school for their kids to go to. They want a grocery store to be able to shop locally. They want that town center rebuilt. And so there's a recognition that there are a lot of components to a community, that it's not just one person's home. Now, not everyone has the privilege of thinking generations forward. And so we also do recognize that some of the sense of urgency is people will only have so many years, and where are they going to spend them? And so we do have to move quickly, with recognition that there are some people who cannot afford to wait financially or otherwise. So we really do have to move with a sense of urgency. And there's been long discussion around what sort of policy impediments there have been to building housing long before these communities were hit by this tragedy. So why not take this opportunity to say, if we're able to expedite redevelopment in communities that have typically been sensitive to development because of the circumstances in which they find themselves, how do we take this opportunity to think about not only bringing them back into community with one another, but how we help build community going forward? And why would we keep those policies that prevent that if we're now characterizing them as an impediment to creating the quality of life that we want? And so I don't think that one has to be at the expense of the other, so long as we keep our mind and our focus on, what is the next step? What is the next action? And I think to your point about, how it's been characterized, I think layers of government can create bureaucratic nightmares for people, whether it's in the individual rebuilding of a home or some of the things that you've seen play out in some of those news reports. So I think the best thing that we can do is find the ways that we streamline and work together to achieve what we actually want, not just create a new body because it sounds nice. I mean, I have to say, I'm very excited about our Blue Ribbon Commission. There was a moment of hesitation for me to say, I was like, oh God, a Blue Ribbon Commission, is that really, and recognition that if we didn't take the authority to convene these experts and charge you all with moving quickly but moving in a smart way, who else was going to do that? And if not now, when? So we do have those structures in place for a reason, And so using them in a way, not just to sort of say, I've checked that box and now we can move on, somebody else is responsible for that, but instead saying, how do we convene people and move forward and turn it into action, not just something that's going to collect dust on a shelf as a reference point. And I think that's the combination that we really need to sit in, is people don't often see in real time both policy change and the corresponding action. So if we're able to demonstrate that right now, I think people will have more confidence that the policies that we are putting into place for building a community physically, but also creating community and what all of that means, I think they'll have more confidence in the policies, outside of the context of a disaster recovery.
Thank you so much. Alexis, supervisor's response seems to go right into your wheelhouse. And how do we get people who have been maybe NIMBYs before, and all of a sudden, as the supervisor noted, they flipped. It's like I've been wanting to stop development in my neighborhood. Oh, no, now it has to happen really, really fast. Could you describe those dynamics that you've encountered when it comes to disasters in other places as well?
Yes, I do think, as Supervisor Horvath said, it is an interesting juxtaposition. And I think Sam mentioned it as well, right? The need to want to rebuild quickly, yet at the same time, the need to recognize the value in coming together in terms of how that rebuilding ends up happening. And so when you think in from the land use context, right, and you are recovering from a disaster, there is that immediate sort of gut check, right, wanting to get back to normalcy and what it used to be. But then also, especially in a wildfire context, right, where the resilience of your community really is, inherent in making sure that the folks around you and your neighbors and the rest of your community holistically are coming together in terms of how to build that resilience. Because as Purva said, it isn't just your one home, it is the entire neighborhood and the entire community. These are still very difficult conversations to have because even though the community has been devastated, it is still your community. And it is the desire to go back to the community that you were in previously. And I think it is that grief period of recognizing that may not exist in the way that it was before, but how can you come together and think about what was missing in your community? How can you use the tools and the streamlining and this moment of action to make investments that improve your community from some of the things that may have been missing before, whether that is more robust on the commercial side or a neighborhood commercial, some different amenities that you wanted, more park space, better roadways, more, bicycle lanes, whatever it may be. This is the opportunity for the community to come together. I think, unfortunately, Jonathan, as you mentioned with NIMBYs, there will still be some of that. And I think the key is really listening to the community. And as Sam said, where are they? Listen to what they want, and then coming up holistically with an approach to help and address that. But I think, again, it gets back to my earlier remarks as well. What we're talking about here is in the aftermath of a disaster. But I think if we're thinking about in other communities where maybe this hasn't happened, how can that community start to adopt things like, emergency land use tools, something that goes into effect after, before when a disaster happens, but the tools are in place in advance, and that those conversations that need to happen about what that looks like have occurred previously. So some of those NIMBY conversations have already been taken off the table. So tools that can allow for more flexible reuse of properties where a property has been severely damaged in a disaster. Things like that can help to shorten the recovery period. And by having those conversations in advance of the disaster, you hopefully are taking some of those NIMBY voices off of the table. And then also, we haven't talked about it here. We're talking specifically about resilience in the wildfire context, but the state of California and the entire United States is also in a housing crisis, right? We are not building enough housing in this country. And so this is also an opportunity to think about within your community, what is the housing that is missing? Are you missing workforce? Are you missing middle? Do you need more affordable housing? Because as we know, there are a lot of folks who work in a community but cannot afford to live in a community. So when you are rebuilding in a resilient way, after a disaster, there is the opportunity to be able to look more holistically at where could you, in a safe manner, potentially add some additional housing for those missing pieces. And while, again, there is always that NIMBY concern about not wanting to change the community and to keep things as they were the day that you arrived after a disaster, and in particular, in LA and other places, unfortunately, that's just not the case, because that community is no longer there in terms of the physical structures. The people are the community. And so it's important to think what will make that community thrive from a people perspective, and how can you use this as an opportunity to build back in a more resilient way and help to fix some of those things that you knew were already a challenge previously.
Thank you so much. I think Supervisor Horvath, and you too, Alexis, you just brought up such an important key framing, which is people. And we've been talking about hardening buildings. We've been talking about changing building codes. But what all the literature reveals is how important it is for there to be social connectedness and cohesion in communities is the greatest source of resilience. So over to you, Sam. Could you reflect on the ways that we get to greater social cohesion? And what could, let's say, an Altadena, Sunset Mesa, I didn't know those numbers, Supervisor. That was stunning. I also recently learned from Pasadena, they lost over 120 homes, which would have been a headline anywhere in the United States. Pasadena loses 120 homes, but it paled in comparison to the thousands that were lost by unincorporated Altadena. Sierra Madre even lost a couple dozen homes as well. But so here are these communities that have these individual jurisdictions, Sam. And I want to get to the social cohesion idea, but related to this, is the answer to go city by city, neighborhood by neighborhood, county by county, state by state, leave us alone, we're going to do our own thing? Or is there a way of getting a bigger vision that can be motivational for all the jurisdictions?
I love the question. It's also like a trap. At Greater LA is almost by design allergic to regional planning and to kind of think separately. And I mean that not like there's some individual pulling strings behind that's kind of blocking that from happening, but it's culturally part of the whole narrative of going west and forming your own identity and doing all this stuff. And it's kind of baked into every level of cultural, legal, and social institutions. And I've had the privilege of working in LA on these issues since the Woolsey fire with you, Jonathan, and others. And I think if we embark on some project to form some master grand vision that's going to work for every community, it's dead on arrival. I don't think that's going to work in a place like LA, nor I think is that the right approach, because that feels very top down, even if it's kind of receiving a lot of input from various communities. So I think there's going to need to be different horses for different courses, to use a metaphor. And that it ultimately is going to boil down to communities having some level of self-determination about what kind of process they want to be a part of. And some communities might be willing to go on an adventure and kind of think radically different about the land use and spatial planning. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the governments that represent them and the policymakers that support them to kind of give them the resources and tools and support that. Others are going to be less inclined to do that. And I think they also need to get good information and get support. So I don't think there's a single solution. What we do know is from past disasters and events that have been devastating to neighborhoods, when the will of a smart few tries to get imposed on the many that are trying to go through a difficult process, it blows up in everyone's face and you end up with terrible outcomes. And sometimes that's the will of many of a few powerful people that say, you know what, just let people do what they want to do and let the chips fall. And you end up with places that used to have 100 homes, there's only 4 or 5 left standing. And it's just this kind of individual decision that leaves a community scarred from an event for years and years. Other times it's the kind of overextending that muscle of planfulness and saying, we're going to have this type of a community. This is the opportunity to do something, a kind of single developer, a single policymaker's vision. And you end up with something that doesn't even resemble the past, and people don't feel that connection. You know, I think as kind of a planner and someone that teaches architecture and design, we often talk about, you know, the difference between place and space. You know, place is space with memory attached to it. And how, as we're doing this rebuilding, are we honoring the memories of the past communities, and how are we building space for new memories to be created, to create a new place that people want to be a part of? And I think at the end of the day, any process needs to honor that. Thank
you, Sam. I would like to end with a lightning round, so get ready. I would like to hear, let's make up a town in Southern California that's in the WUI. And you have the ability to tell the local elected officials in that little town that's in the WUI, and you've just gone through what we've just gone through in Los Angeles. Can you give a pithy piece of advice to that elected official? So, Apurv, I'm going to start with you. What would you tell that official that they need to do?
A single source of resources and information for everyone to collaboratively seek and provide into, as opposed to piecemeal, smaller entities and agencies and communities. A single collected resource.
Alexis, what would you say is your one piece of advice for that elected official in the WUI that they don't know, but we've just learned recently?
I mean, we didn't talk a lot about it, but I mean, my piece of advice would be around sort of building codes and code enforcement, right? And to figure out the financing to help with the retrofit of existing homes to meet some of those new, fire resistant standards, right? Just to lower the overall risk.
Thank you so much. Sam, over to you.
I think it's to resist that tension and urge to kind of reset and get back to where things were, and be open to different possible futures, and to respond to your communities and help lead that conversation, not just be passive.
And Supervisor Horvath.
Well, I think part of it is communication, making sure that people feel both heard and understood, and that you're also, I think, to piggyback off of a singular location where they can get that information, so they know how to access what's going on, helps them feel included. I think the resistance at any point of this experience, if resistance has come into play, it's because there's been either unreliable or just outright bad communication. And so improving communication systems helps to build the trust that is the foundation for all of the change that we're looking at. And so I think for me, that's been key.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone agreed. This has been a really insightful panel, and I just want to thank you for your participation. Thanks for being here. And we're going on to the next panel in just a second. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.